are about to experience, Jackson Snyder presents. Direct from the Vero Essin Yahad, a Hebrew Nation radio original program. JSP is a variety show seeking out Jewish and Christian origins, religion, theology and history, and doing so in a fashion that is both educational and entertaining. Welcome to Jackson Snyder Presents.
Greetings! This episode begins a series on zombies. In the first episode, we're going to look at zombies and religion, specifically how the zombie experience relates to believers. And in the second episode, we're going to look more into the scientific side of zombies. There's no doubt that zombie is the favorite monster of contemporary entertainment, and I know that there are many people who have probably watched The Walking Dead and kept it a secret from others, but there are great lessons to be learned from some zombic materials, including The Walking Dead, and we can gauge why people are interested in this particular monster above all others, especially in these days. So we start off with an interview from, of all places, CBN, Christian Broadcasting Network, and a Christian author who has the gall to write a Christian book about zombies. Do you think he ran into persecutions? Well, just listen. Now here's an interesting little article I found on CBN, Christian Broadcasting Network. It's an interview with the author of Undead, Revived, Resuscitated, and Reborn. Now that's an eye-catching title of an intriguing new book from Abington Press. That's the Methodist Press. It's a book about zombies, a Christian book about the undead. Now, if that doesn't grab your attention, check your pulse. You've been drinking too much blowfish juice. In it, author Clay Morgan explores death and the supernatural, explaining how faith and the living dead intersect. Because zombies aren't just around for Halloween anymore, with the genre finding huge success in Hollywood. Recently, Clay Morgan shared with CBN about this phenomenon, what we can learn from these supernatural stories, and how Jesus is the epitome of the anti-zombie. Excuse me if I use Yahshua the rest of the way through. First question, what's a Christian doing writing a book about zombies? Morgan says, I wrote a book about zombies for much the same reason C.S. Lewis wrote a book like The Screwtape Letters about demons, to find light in the darkness. Tales of the supernatural are ready-made for Christianity. Zombies are ridiculously popular and culturally relevant, so zombies are a great way to get someone's attention. From there, we can have a marvelous discussion about spiritual life and spiritual death. I'm also genuinely interested in the topic and pop culture in general. Millions of people never go to church or learn about biblical faith. For them, entertainment may be the sole medium informing their beliefs of the supernatural. Indeed, if someone walks out of a movie about zombies or vampires asking questions about life beyond the grave, then that's a great opportunity to have a meaningful conversation about eternal things, sowing seeds to needs. I would like to ask him, have you been kicked out of the church for even considering zombies? Evidently, when you were watching them, nobody else knew, or you'd have been turned in by now. Have you received any criticism for examining themes like horror and zombies? Has he? Morgan says nothing major yet, but I certainly expected some. I'm sure some people don't want anything to do with zombies, even as a starting point for discussing biblical miracles, but anyone who reads the book will see that it's about much more. The stories are fun, so there's not much of a horror zombie vibe for most readers. CBN asks, why are we fascinated by the living dead? Morgan replies, in part, I think we're compelled by the world that the living dead dwell in, a post-apocalyptic environment where humanity as we know it is over. There are no more bills to pay or jobs to pursue or social circles to navigate. There's equality in the face of death. As for the monsters, it's hard to look away from such an uncompromising threat. And on a deeper level, we recognize the meaning of an existence with no hope for redemption. Their totality is so threatening. One misstep, and it's over. And the victims in these stories don't often just die. They are turned into evil monsters, which is more terrifying than anything. CBN, why is being scared entertaining? Morgan replies, for most people it's exciting, an adrenaline rush. The key is that we aren't in any real danger, so we pay a lot of money for the illusion of such things. Maybe some of us are just thrill seekers. I suspect that part of it is a desire to find out what our thresholds are. What I do know is that if a horror movie plot like a zombie outbreak really happened, it would not be fun. The real thing would be so truly terrifying, but entertainment is a different thing. Question, what's your favorite zombie film and why? Morgan says, I think that the first zombie movie that truly captivated me was 28 Days Later, in which a man wakes from a coma after London has already been devastated by plague. In addition to the quality of the filmmaking and suspense, the story makes you think about fate and the meaningful relationships in our lives. Most of all, you have to consider what humanity becomes in the face of ultimate depravity. After all, zombies are a visible representation of cursed creation. If I had a clear favorite, it's probably Zombieland, which balances humor with the fright of a world gone wrong. That one really allows you to see the empty stores and communities and consider what the world might look like during an apocalypse. CBN, what spiritual lessons do zombie stories teach us? Morgan, the biggest lesson might be that it's possible to exist without truly being alive. A lot of us shamble through life, thoughtlessly going through the motions while feeling dead inside. That includes people in churches and youth groups. We may look like we're alive to the people around us while masking the decay in our heart. I used to punch in on Sundays and walk away largely unchanged. I suppose he means church. What are we living for? What's the meaning of our existence? Zombies aimlessly roam around looking for one more chance to gorge on an appetite of destruction. Yet no matter how much they feed on what they desire, they are always empty. If anybody has ever wondered what's missing in life, they can probably relate to that kind of emptiness. Fortunately, we don't have to stay that way. Elohim offers ultimate fulfillment and abundant life. CBN, a section of your book is titled Undead in the Bible. Are you saying there are zombies in the Bible? Morgan, that idea is really the heart of the book. Most of the chapters in Undead describe the 6 individuals in the New Testament who were raised from the dead by Elohim. Yahshua performed 3 of these jaw-dropping miracles and became the 4th. Peter and Paul were also used to bring someone back from the dead. Of course, these individuals weren't zombies in the Hollywood sense. Like Lazarus, those folks were restored to life. But the wordplay makes sense since culture is so fascinated with dead people coming back to life. I thought it was pretty cool to show how many times that type of thing happened in the Bible. The same Elohim who brought people back from the physical death in the 1st century is still able to bring us back from spiritual death today. CBN, in Undead, you say we see ourselves in zombies. How's that? Morgan, the thing about zombies is that they look familiar in their t-shirts, jeans, curlers, slippers. Other monsters, such as aliens, vampire, or werewolves, for example, look so different. We see ourselves in zombies, the worst possible version of our neighbors and ourselves. They hit close to home. Metaphorically, some of us see frightening reflections of ourselves when we look in the mirror because we know ugly, personal truths. CBN. A major theme of a lot of zombie films and stories is when the living become more monstrous than the zombies in their quest for survival. What is it about zombie movies that help us to examine the dark side of human nature? You've nailed it, says Morgan. Zombie fiction is always about the survivors and how they'll interact. The title of that show, The Walking Dead, isn't a reference to the zombies, but the people attempting to go on. These stories reduce everything to its base. Money and social status don't help anymore. In such dire circumstances, the truth about human nature is revealed, and we know it ain't pretty. The ancient prophet Jeremiah, said that our hearts are deceitful above all else and even desperately wicked. Any good zombie story shows how wicked some people can be. CBN, what do you mean by Jesus is the anti-zombie? Morgan, zombies are the complete opposite to Yeshua. They come back from the dead to take lives. Yeshua came back from the dead to give life to all. Zombies are damaged, decaying, and terrifying. Yeshua came back, resurrected in perfection, a beautiful sight to all who believe. Zombies transform people from life to death. Yeshua offers transformation from death to life, and that's why I call him the anti-zombie. CBN, Undead also gets into vampires. How does that folklore play into this? Morgan, monster stories often subvert Elohim's story. For example, vampires receive immortality at the expense of their soul. They take blood to have life, which is completely the opposite of Yeshua, who gave blood so that others might have life. Blood is a central theme throughout both scripture and vampire lore. The other thing about vampires is that they are the ultimate in selfishness, which is something I used to really struggle with. To use another metaphor, spiritual vampires are takers, and they can be found anywhere, churches included. We need to make sure we're not acting like vampires to the people around us by losing sight of what it means to be a servant like Yeshua. CBN, beyond talk of zombies and vampires, this book speaks to deeper issues. What is the message? Morgan, ultimate message of Undead is that Elohim is able to breathe life into each one of us. He wants to transform us, and it will be the most awesome miracle we've ever experienced. Spiritual death isn't just about ignoring Elohim. If we're honest, some of us may be in churches every week, but we know that something big is missing from our lives. Like Lazarus, it's possible to be a friend of Yeshua for a while before experiencing a whole new level of his miraculous life-giving power in a new way. Who do you know that needs to hear about the transforming power of Elohim? Maybe they're not even interested in going to church, but they just might find Undead engaging enough to discover the mind-blowing force of Elohim's love. Again, the name of that book is Undead, Revived, Resuscitated, and Reborn. Now I'll give you a little testimony. Somebody told me so-and-so was watching The Walking Dead on TV, and I'd never seen a zombie show until just a couple years ago. And I watched that series. I think there were 7 seasons. I learned more about human nature in that 7 seasons, which I, of course, binge-watched, than I have in any other aspect or training place or church in my life. You see friendship, you see love, you see betrayal, you see horror. You experience the very depths of human depravity. And again, I'm not talking about the zombies here. I'm talking about the human beings as they have to deal with themselves in this apocalyptic scenario. And another thing about that series in particular is that I can't think of a training ground any better than that for learning how to deal with evil spirits. And in fact, to deal with other people. In fact, I was thinking about the possibility that that series might be based on how to deal with spiritual evil and evil entities. There's so many lessons in there. Now, I know some people think that if they see violence on TV or something, that they're going to get slapped down by God or something like that, or they just simply can't handle it. No, you stay away from it. But if you can look at that series in particular from the point of view that I'm giving you here, you can have revelations on how to keep from being a zombie in the world you live in. Now, I've watched other zombie movies and I've consumed a lot of audiobooks. Some are better than others as far as moral lessons. And some of them, they are so depraved that there is no good morality in them at all. They are made or written for shock value only. I don't say that anyone needs to watch or listen to that, but the fact is, you can get something wholesome out of shows that are about depravity, or books that are about depravity. Depends on what your point of view is. Depends on whether you're going to be looking from the floor up into these things or looking from the sky down. There's nothing kept from you that you cannot read or consume in this world, with the exception of a few things mentioned in the Torah. But other than that, don't you think Elohim wants us to learn as much as we can, even about evil and depravity and sin? But then again, I think that a believer has to be at a certain faith level, and as I said before, perspective, in order to get these good lessons out of what appear to be bad things. I thought this was a pretty good interview. Surprising to find it on CBN. But to tell you the truth, it sounds like the book is for unbelievers, and people like us, I think, would probably be pretty bored with it. But it might be good as a tool of evangelism for those that you know that watch violence on TV and yet are unconverted.
What zombies tell us about religion and faith. Zombies are the most popular monster of all the modern era because they address perennial questions of religion, argues Karen Willows. There's no more room in hell, goes the famous line, lifted from Romero's infamous The Night of the Living Dead. For decades, the zombie has fascinated public consciousness and caught the imagination of authors and filmmakers. The zombie has always been a metaphor, however, and behind the shambling walk and the slow groan lays a wealth of commentary on modern society. Religion dispatchers published articles that looked at what they termed zombie theology, indicating that discussions on decaying corpses and religion may overlap, particularly on the question of what it means to be human. Zombies, however, from their roots to modern incarnations, have consistently posed difficult questions about life, death, morality, and the end of the world. Wasn't that a great end-of-the-world sound effect? You have been listening to Jackson Snyder Presents on Hebrew Nation Radio. The word zombie and the origin of the zombie mythos can be traced to Haiti. The religion of the islanders is infamous the world over, voodoo, or for the technical scholars of the religion who are keen to distance it from misconceptions, Vodou. Vodou is a religion unique to the Haitians, though it has links to West African religions and is influenced, too, by the period of forced conversion to Christianity during the 18th century. Vodou is a religion with a great, good God, but one so distant and so transcendental that he is unknowable. Instead, lesser gods, a.k.a. the Loa, are worshipped. Note what the word Loa and Eloah have in common. In the Vodou tradition, a zombie is not a flesh-eating monster, but a human being who has forgotten who they are and been made subject to the will of a sorcerer, a bokor. They are mindless slaves, a description that's not incidental, according to the U.S. journalist and academic Amy Willents. As I recall, she wrote a book on this subject years ago, and she argues that the zombie was a very logical offspring of New World slavery. Haiti, after all, is populated by former slaves, brought over to work in horrific, inhumane conditions for no pay. Their lives, ambitions, and futures were stripped from them and were, instead, replaced by the daily toil of cotton picking and manual labor. William Seabrook, the writer and itinerant journalist, recounts in The Magic Island an experience of meeting a field worker with a vacant look in his eyes, unresponsive, docile, a supposed zombie. The rumors recorded by Seabrook and others tell of how nefarious sorcerers exhume dead bodies, resurrecting them and reviving them into a half-life, and then subjecting the zombies to do their own will. This was an understandable nightmare scenario for Haitians, especially the slaves who spent their lives working the fields. Willents argues that the zombie myth grew out of this environment. To become a zombie was the slave's worst nightmare, to be dead and still a slave. The Haitian zombies were immortalized in Western consciousness with movies such as The White Zombie, but it is a very different type of zombie that is familiar in the modern era. It all began with I Am Legend, a novel about the last man alive following a spread of a virus that turned humans into vampire zombies. The author, Richard Matheson, created an entire genre. The zombie went from being supernatural to a plague. I Am Legend also introduced the idea of the zombie apocalypse. George Romero, inspired by I Am Legend, directed The Night of the Living Dead, a movie that put the final touches on the modern zombie with its depiction of hordes of slow-walking human flesh-eaters. The zombies come a long way from its origins, yet whether a Haitian zombie or a Romero zombie, both pose a question about what it means to be human. In Vodouism, the human being consists of the physical and the spiritual. The spiritual is further divided into the Gros Bon Ange and the Petit Bon Ange. The former, translated as great good angels, is the life force, whereas the latter, the small good angel, is the self, or the memories and experiences and idiosyncrasies that make a person unique. To create a zombie, the Bokar captures the Petit Bon Ange, rendering the zombie an empty shell. Certain religions tend to envisage the human as mind, body, spirit, but modern zombies seem to appeal to a more Cartesian view of the self. The viruses that begin the zombie infection are explained variously as somehow ramping up aggression levels or otherwise disabling higher brain function. The zombie is a human being who has somehow stopped functioning. This begs the question, what is a human being? And what is missing from the zombies that mean they no longer fit the definition of human beings? As many have pointed out, the zombie metaphor is one about being almost human, almost entirely human. They look like us, dress like us, and just about sound like us, but something separates them and us. Many religions turn to the soul to explain the question of what makes a human being unique. The soul is the true self, or the Petit Bon Ange of Voodooism. It's otherworldly, subtle, and often indefinable, but it makes us who we are. The Haitian zombies lost their humanity by losing their agency, a metaphor for slavery. Romero's zombies are sometimes presented as having lost their humanity a long time ago by becoming slaves to consumerism. In one of his most famous sequels, Dawn of the Dead, the survivors flock to a shopping center, only to find themselves besieged by zombies who do in death what they did in life, and flock to the mall. Zombies have repeatedly been used as a way of critiquing society and questions of humanity. A reoccurring theme in the spate of zombie films released in the past 2 decades has been morality. The cataclysmic events following a zombie apocalypse that have been explored in movies such as 28 Days Later and World War Z, as well as a successful TV series, The Walking Dead. The zombie apocalypse scenario provides a unique context for asking perennial questions of religion. What does it mean to be good? In a world where civilization has ended, and perhaps nearly the human race, does morality change? Can actions such as murder, theft, and even rape be rationalized? 28 Days Later, the British zombie movie that injected new life to the genre with its depiction of rage-filled sprinting zombies, presented the audience with these questions with the fullest brutality. We encounter groups of survivors who consider the new world needing new moralities, and who are willing to abduct and abuse others to continue surviving. Religions have often been advocates of the view that there exists an objective good and evil that remain fixed regardless of context. The zombie apocalypse challenges this idea. If stealing and killing another band of survivors was the only way you could secure your own family's survival, would you? The apocalypse destroys civilization and the pre-existing authorities. If there are no police, no state, no society, does being a good human being mean the same thing? Some, however, argue that zombie genre allows for an unrestrained, guiltless violence. The zombies are beyond redemption and no longer human, so unfathomable actions can be taken against them without a second thought. This allows for an incredible amount of violence on screen, a level that would otherwise be seen as incredibly evil. In Matheson's I Am Legend, the author reveals at the end that the monsters killed by the book's protagonist were, in fact, a new society. They were cognizant and not simply mindless monsters. The protagonist had turned into the monster, creeping into homes and killing the sleeping monsters when they were most vulnerable. The allusions to modern warfare, in which our enemies are dehumanized and turned into monsters who are mindlessly aggressive but lack the agency or will, are clear and have been explored by some thinkers as being analogous to the zombie hordes.
I will knock down the gates of hell. I will smash the doorposts and leave the doors buckled, and I will let the dead return to eat the living, and the dead will be more than living.
That's Ishtar from the Epic of Gilgamesh. These lines from the Assyrian epic echo the famous lines from the Night of the Living Dead, "There's no more room in hell." Life after death is a perpetual mystery for humanity, and no matter how far we develop, it remains a mystery. Zombies address a deeper unease within us. What if there is something after death? And what if it is worse? The zombie represents a liminality between life and death. Neither here nor there, argues Kelly Baker of Religion Dispatches. I quote, "Zombies are inherently liminal, that strange place betwixt and between. They are ambiguity, an ambiguity that invokes an uncomfortable dread in us. Of course, resurrection after death is a common motif in religious traditions and a sign of divine power and mastery over the human experience. Zombies adopt this motif, but invert it. Rather than being a sign of the good god, or gods, the zombie is from somewhere even more evil. The modern world has meant zombies are now more commonly associated with viruses and plagues than the supernatural, but perhaps as a sign of a postmodern turn in movie making, the demonic role of the zombie has reasserted itself in recent years. The remake of Evil Dead returned the zombie to the fold of the supernatural, and the cult hit REC combined the scientific with the supernatural telling of a virus that is itself a carrier of demonic possession. The fear of death, particularly the unknown that lies beyond, is a unique part of the human experience. Zombies force us to stare death in the face, almost quite literally. Few monsters epitomize the 21st century quite like zombies do. We see ourselves in them, fearing our slow shuffle into the mindless routine. We see our worst fears in them, the loss of humanity for a more base desire. And we can see the big questions of our time posed through them. What it means to be human, to be good, and what life after death might look like. Zombies are set to dominate our media for the coming years, especially with all the sequels and knockoffs of The Walking Dead. Zombies may be dead, but zombie stories are alive and kicking. You who are hearing me tonight, you might have noticed I mentioned a very important book that ought to be read right along with the New Testament, which I call the Nazarene Acts of the Apostles. Now, I want to offer this to you, free of charge. You can choose a PDF or you can choose the audiobook, but you must request it. And you can request it from me by going to the website yahad.me. Yeah, you just put that in the address bar, yahad.me. Tell me what you want. You can say that book or that audio book or whatever, and I'll send it right on over to you. Look, you'll be amazed at what it has to say. Instead of focusing on Paul, like the Acts of the Apostles, the Nazarene Acts focuses on Peter, Kepha, and it's journalized, that is to say, Peter's travels, his preachings, his acts, and his complete debates with Simon Magus are all in there. It's an exciting book, and there's a storyline to it as well that you'll enjoy. Again, just request it from yahad.me, yahad.me, and I shall send it right along. You have been listening to Jackson Snyder Presents on Hebrew Nation Radio.